Hello and welcome to Ditching Hourly. I'm Jonathan Stark. And today I'm joined by Carl Richards of Behavior Gap. Carl, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jonathan. Super excited to talk to you.
Same here. So before we get started, for anyone who hasn't yet heard of you, could you give folks a just quick background?
Yeah. So I, it's crazy. Let me think about how to do it quickly. So I was a financial advisor, and that's not normally thought of as a creative job. So, but one day I found myself in a meeting. I had a familiar experience that I finally sort of realized what was going on. I was meeting with clients, and I thought I was really good at communicating. And these were really smart clients. All my clients were really smart, successful people. And I was trying to explain a concept to them, and I was just getting blank stares, despite thinking that I was really good at this, and knowing that these are smart people. So since they were smart people, it was clearly, in fact, I remember who it was, a doctor and a technology sales rep, really sort of technical sales rep. And I remember thinking like, this is bad, right? Like I'm doing the best I can. There's this concept they really need to understand, and I'm not getting it across. So out of an act of really desperation, and I had never really done this before. I didn't think of myself as a doodler. I didn't draw. I didn't do visual journals. I'd done none of this. I'd never taken an art class in my life. But out of an act of desperation, I was like, there was a whiteboard in the office that I'd never used. And I jumped up and was like, no, like this. And I drew, like a couple of boxes and some arrows and some circles or something. And I remember the feeling in the room when the clients were like, oh, now I get it. And I became sort of addicted, is the word I like to use, to that experience, the experience of taking something that was seemingly complex, whether it was or not doesn't matter, but seemingly complex, and reducing it to something simple. And so I started doing that publicly. I mean, I started a little blog. This was years and years ago. My mom and my sister were the only ones that would read it. I found out later my sister was lying, so it was really just my mom. But I kept doing it. And every time a question came up, every time I read something or somebody asked me a question or a client asked me a question, and at this point it was all about money, investing and spending and budgeting. I would answer the question, and then I would try to draw some simple sketch. And at this point, it was Sharpie and cardstock and a Fujitsu snap scanner. I did that for a while. I just kept putting them up on this little blog, and I did that for a while. It was probably a year. Which seems like it happened pretty quick, to be honest, a year. And then I got an email, and there's a little bit of story that I'm leaving out, but not much. I got an email from the editor at the New York Times saying, hey, we love these. Would you do it for us? And I knew enough to say yes and kind of figure it out later. So that started this column for the New York Times that we did. And again, I had no clue this would happen when I said yes, but we did that. That column ended up running weekly for 10 years. That led to the book. And then, maybe 3 or 4 years into that column, I kind of got bored with just straight money. And I kind of expanded the definition of money and started doing things around creativity. And we started thinking of it as a business life column. And so that expanded it, imposter syndrome and fear and doing public work. And then the 2 books and some speaking engagements, and I started getting asked to speak at creative conferences, and I did an art show, a solo 8-week art show, and another one in London, and all of it was 100% by accident, and I couldn't ever believe that it happened. So that's a little bit of the bio.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I love the juxtaposition of like certified financial planner and creator of the sketch guy column.
Right.
It feels like
super fun to me.
Interesting Venn diagram there.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'm glad you brought up the New York Times thing, because I was going to ask you about that backstory. And is there a piece that, so I would love to connect the dots, if there are any dots to connect. Was it, because the listener is probably either blogging or something like that, YouTube channel, or they are thinking about starting one. Maybe it's a mailing list, maybe it's a podcast. But people who listen generally do some sort of content creation. And I have a I'll just quickly say short stories, not dissimilar, where I was just, years ago, 2000, I don't even know, 5-ish, I was blogging about a really niche topic. I feel like I posted 6 posts in 6 weeks maybe, and a book publisher contacted me completely out of the blue.
Right.
And I'm just curious if the New York Times thing was completely out of the blue, or if you did anything to kind of, was there anything you did that actually led to that, or was it pretty much out of the blue?
I wish I had something more, right? Like I've been asked this question so many times, including my editor at the Times was like, "Hey, what would you tell, so and so who wants to?" And I was like, "Ron, I've got nothing for you. I mean, the only thing I have, and this unfortunately, like this doesn't fit into the tips and tricks and tactics and hacks that everybody wants, because we all want deeply, we just want a tactic that we can follow. And I think this, endless focus that I have on tactics and we all have on tactics is actually just a place to hide.
I agree.
But so I'm not gonna it would be cute to make up a story, but it really was the only thing I have is playing in traffic, right? Like that was it. Like I didn't even know what SEO was. Like I just kept doing the thing, and I don't know why. For some people, doing the thing that you just can't not do, right? Like for some people that ends up being a quiet life of disappointment and desperation. And for other people, something hits. And I wish I knew the answer to that. That's the question I've been thinking about for over a decade. Like, because they're doing work in public doesn't guarantee that a book publisher is going to reach out to you. In fact, it's highly unlikely that they will. But I promise you, the only thing I have is I promise you they won't if you don't do it.
Yep.
Right?
I'm actually glad that you have a non-answer there, because it is an answer. It's like, stop worrying about that stuff. Keep playing in traffic.
Yeah, that's all. I often want to be like I think a lot about empathetic hugs versus punches in the nose. And this feels like both. Like it's like deeply empathetic. Like, look, brother, I get you. I understand that this can be a lonely pursuit. You got a thing that's bothering you, and by bothering, I mean like stirring within you, and you can't stop doing it, and you're going to do it publicly. You're going to do it. And stop worrying about all that other stuff. Like I didn't even know. I just did the work, and sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's not. And that's the big mystery for me.
Right. I mean, I'm a big fan of Seth Godin's approach of suggesting for people who just need a little bit more than what we're saying right now, just find the minimum viable audience for the present that you made. And it's so doable. It just feels so doable. So, okay, we can move on. I was just curious if I'm glad it was out of the blue, basically, because I think that frees people actually to just focus on creating stuff they want to create.
Well, and Jonathan, before you move on, let me say, like, that has not stopped. Like, I don't have the same thing for the first book, same thing for the second book, same thing for the book I'm working on now. So like there is no master plan. And so I think to me, that's actually freeing, like you said. So it hasn't stopped. I haven't come up with a formula since.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's go into that a little bit, because I do know for some things we're going to get into here, you have at least one, probably multiple daily practices. Mm-hmm. So it feels like you must have systems in place that, allow you to continue, or not allow you to, but support you in showing up every day, going back to traffic. And this isn't really a show about systems, but I would just say to the person listening that, I wouldn't say I have a master plan. Like, I don't know every step I'm going to take over the next, even let's just say year, definitely 3 years. But I've got a rough goal for the kind of impact I want to have and who I want to help. And I have a strategy to do that. And there's some systems in place that help me show up every day and do it. And, meet with great people like this, have them on the podcast. And, there are, it's not that there are no tactics. It's just not worth worrying about the tactics. You just, have a goal, set up a system to support it, and look, heads down, do the system. So
yeah, I mean, the word that keeps coming to mind as you're talking is habits. Like I have a habit of noticing things in the world. I even have it. I even joke. There's a face I make. I call it the huh face. Like, huh? Like I have a habit of looking for that to happen a couple times a day. And then when it happens, I pull out my iPhone. And see, this is the interesting piece. Like if you don't have an iPhone, you can't do this. Like that's the places to hide thing.
Uh-huh.
But I'm only going to tell your listeners this because I think it demonstrates like how simple it needs to be. I mentioned that earlier, cardstock, Sharpie, and Fujitsu snap scanner. Like I didn't have a flatbed scanner. There was no music playing. So now it's like I notice something in the world. I pull out my phone. Under notes, I have a folder called ideas. I take a note. And if I'm moving, I'll just record on voice memo the note. Then that folder, when it's time to put something into the world, I go to that folder and I pull up the idea. Like there's one in there from last night. There's one in there. Let me just do it real quick. Notes. There was one really. Oh yeah, the idea of reinvesting. Like I have a habit of as soon as I feel better, like healthy, I'm energetic, I'll go make a big athletic goal. And somebody was like, well, what if you just reinvested that energy? So like that's an idea that will go up on the podcast tomorrow. So I go into the notes folder. There's an ideas folder. I pull it up. Oh, reinvest is there. When I do something with the idea of reinvest, I move it to another folder. The folder is called used ideas. Mm-hmm. And that's the end of the system.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are habits. And I think James Clear's work around process and systems is super smart. And I think that's the thing that sometimes I think there's a big difference between being creative and the process of making stuff.
Oh, that's a good point.
And I don't think of myself as creative, although I do now because I'm like, oh, well, actually, it turns out being creative isn't some magic. For some people, it is, and that's awesome, like cool. But there's also a process of, and I call it making stuff on purpose. It's like stuff. It's not art. It's not, I mean, it is, but like there's no fancy feelings about it. It's like there's a big difference between being creative, and sometimes they're the same thing, but just for people who don't feel like they're creative, you can create a system for making stuff. It's just like another widget.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal. So anyway, yeah, I agree that there are systems, process, and the habits.
Yep. And James has been on the show. So folks, if you're interested, if you don't know who James Clear is, check out the podcast and his book, Atomic Habits. It's fabulous. So yeah, I do a daily mailing list, and when I have one of those ideas, same thing, puppy dog face, I like that. And I whip out the phone and I start a new Gmail message, and I type the idea or I say the idea and I just close it, and it automatically saves on all my devices. It's instantly available everywhere. And
so good.
Yeah. And it's just the teeniest little spark will happen during the day. And I just know if I don't instantly grab it, I'm going to forget it. 30 seconds later, kids come and say something to me, gone, all gone. But if you get into the habit of capturing those things, even if you don't have an answer, it's just an inspiration sometimes, and or weird observation or a paradox. If you don't capture that, it is going to be gone. But when you do capture it and you get into the habit, I mean, I have like over 600 of these unwritten ideas in this folder. Same thing. If I don't have an idea for today, I just open up the folder and, oh yeah, let's write about that. So
yeah, can I just mention two things? One, I've heard that like it's gone thing. And I think that's true I don't know where the boundary conditions are on any of this stuff. I only want to mention this because maybe there's some listeners who think a little differently about it. And I have finally, I've noticed that the good stuff sticks. And I don't know where, again, I don't know the boundary condition of it. I don't know. So I've started to be a little less precious about the idea. I got to capture it. I got to grab it. Because I find that the good stuff comes back. And I don't know if that's just me or, like Elizabeth Gilbert's thing, like, at some point, if you don't let the idea out into the world, it will find a new host. I don't know. Is it 3 times? Is it 1 time? I don't know. But so I've started to be, just recently, I've developed a little less preciousness around like, oh, and I'll even find myself saying it to the idea, like, hey, right now I'm driving, brother, but if you're really good and you want me to be involved, could you come back? Because I think you're not nice and I'd like to see you again, right? Like that kind of thing. And then the second thing I would mention is oh, I forgot what the second thing was. It was preciousness, and then
Well, if it'll come back, right?
yeah, it will come back. Exactly. Exactly.
uh,
This, the not knowing the answer.
mhm.
It took me 5 years to finally get my editor convinced that the point of the column was often the question, right? Because they would say, well, there was always this this common refrain in journalism of like, so what? Like,
Yeah.
what's the point here? And I would have to say the point is the question. And so I only mention that because I wouldn't be scared to share observations and create stuff that you don't know the answer to. And you can be upfront about this. And I say this almost every day on the podcast. I'm like, I don't know, but I think it's interesting. And I promise you, I think we get hung up in this, like, oh, where am I going to find ideas? And this is all the same thread. It's like, if you think something's interesting, and again, it's just for me, it's that face. Like I could be reading something. If I notice I have to pause and go back and read a sentence, that's a sign to me where I'm like, oh, there's something interesting. If you find something interesting, we live in such a connected world now that I promise you, no matter how silly you think it is, there's somebody else out there that's going to find it interesting. It's just a function of doing it long enough in a space where the signal gets clear. So I just wanted to mention that idea of like, you don't have to have the answers. In fact, I think it's far more honest and far more interesting to follow somebody on the exploration. I think of the work I do really as like Shackelford's journal. Like, I don't know, it's not advice, but if you come this way, if you happen to find yourself on this trail, I found a spring here and it was interesting. It was nice to know that there's water and, there's a tree around the corner that provides good shade. I don't know if it's good for you, but it was good for me. So that's the one thing I wanted to mention.
Yeah, I do like that. And I did notice that on the podcast where you're like, this isn't advice, it's observations, things I've observed. Yeah. And there's something, the thing I like about that is it removes the word should from any sentence you would ever write. Because the word should always scares me. If that comes out of my mouth, I'm like,
yeah.
That's a little,
same thing.
Yeah. It's Derek Sivers has a really, he has a very similar approach. I don't know if you're familiar with his stuff, but
for sure.
Yeah, especially his new book where it's like how to live, and it's like, chapter after chapter of almost contradictory ways that you could run your life. Like some of them are completely contradictory, like one right after the other.
Right.
And it's like, here's a bunch of ways you could do it.
Right.
It's a fascinating approach. It's so, and it may be most fascinating in how rare it is. Most books that you would buy, self-help book would be like, here's what you do. First, get up at 4 a.m., make your bet, like the classic stuff. And it's like, yeah, but I already read that and that's not going to work for me for whatever reason. So,
yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I have a feeling that we could talk for 4 hours. So
right.
This is great. So obviously, if people want more of this kind of like talking about Carl's content, like the actual content, go to behaviorgap.com and just start reading. There's like loads and loads and loads of great stuff there. But what I really the primary reason I reached out is, this is a pricing podcast, and you've got a new book coming out that has a, pun intended, novel pricing structure. Could you talk about that a little bit? Where'd that idea come? Well, first, what is it? And then where'd that idea come from? Those sorts of things.
Yeah. So again, no grand scheme here. I wanted to, so keep in mind, let me just describe what it is first. So I do these sketches. I noticed years and years ago, I had other people who gave financial advice for a living. So this would range from CPAs, attorneys, financial advisors, financial planners, private equity, venture capital, anybody who kind of deals with money and takes risk for a living, started to ask for these images. And they would, like, I specifically remember the first time was like, I even remember the guy's name. He said, hey, could I have a print of one of these and would you sign it? And I was like, that is so silly. No. And he said, well, I'll give you $25 for an unsigned one. I'll give you $100 for a signed one. I was like, give me the pen, So that was the first time. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Right. Again, like I'm not very good at seeing the future, but I'm really good at noticing. I'm getting better at noticing tailwind.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. So we started selling like prints, and that's where like the art show, I did an 8-week solo 50-piece show that sold out. And I was like, what?
Wow.
So it was Tailwind. So there's this group of people who use, so this is like purpose art. And I've got lots of friends who are authors. They don't have that kind of an audience. And this idea would not work unless you had that kind of an audience. So people give, my first book, The Behavior Gap, sold to those same people, and they would give it away to their clients. So it's been years of me thinking like, oh, isn't that interesting? These are tools. The sketches themselves and then the writing that goes with the sketches are actual tools. We think of them as conversation grenades. I think I stole that from Hugh McLeod. You throw them in a room and conversations break out. And it's the exact kind of it's supportive conversations for people who give financial advice for a living. They're the exact kind of conversations these people want to be having. So with all of that in mind, I was like, wow, I want to create, well, yeah, I got to tell you another part of the story. I got contacted by somebody who said, and I get these kind of phone calls every once in a while. It's actually quite annoying, but they're like, look, do you own all the rights to your material? And I do, and it's been very intentional. And do you own the name Behavior App? I'm like, I do. And like, would you sell the whole thing to us? And I was like, well, for how much? And they threw out a number, and I was like, tomorrow. And it didn't work out, but it got me thinking. And again, and NFTs played into this too. Like all of these little things mashing together, it got me thinking like, could I ever release, and Bob Dylan selling his catalog for 600 million, like all of those things were in a pot. And I was like, well, could I sell a fractional piece of my library? And so I was thinking through that, and I was like, well, who would I sell it to? And like, well, I could sell it to people who would use it, not just enjoy it, but people would use it. And wouldn't it be interesting if those people thought of themselves as owners, not just customers? So all of that came together, and I was like, all right, I want to create. And then Austin Kleon's book, the size of it, 6x6, the matte, soft cover matte finish, like all of it came together. It was like, okay, I'm going to do a coffee table book that's 8x8 square, soft cover matte finish. And I'm going to I love playing with the juxtaposition of kind of Swiss grid and hand-drawn elements. I love that. It feels like a business suit with flip-flops. Like I just love playing around with that. I love juxtaposition we also have a fundamental concept here called permissionless projects. So I was like, okay, how can I do this project that would involve no one else's permission? No gatekeeper, no publisher, no nothing.
Right.
So that's how the project came about. And it's 8x8 soft cover. It's 52. I took 52 sketches. We wrote up 52 essays. We got them really fine. Like I feel like the subtitle of the book should be better than the New York Times, because these are all things that have appeared. Then they went through more editorial processes based on feedback. So it's 52 sketches, 52 essays. Each fold of the book is a sketch and an essay. And we mix them up a little bit on which side and how they're done. But each fold of the book is self-contained sketch, essay. And then I was like, all right, great. What should I do with this? And I thought, okay, the people, the fractional ownership, the sale of the library, all that, NFT, like all that came together. And I was like, what if I only made this available to 100 people? And each person will get 100 signed and numbered. So I'm going to, I'm literally calling the printer and saying, I'm actually printing 11,000 because I want to keep 1,000 as artist proofs for myself to give to friends. But so 10, I'm ordering 10. That's the only print run. It will never be printed again. And all of this is like, I get so excited about it because it's all part of my ethos. Like a project that has a start, a finish. It's not going to be around forever. Like I loved calling the printer saying 10,000. They're like, first print run? I'm like, no, final only, never again. And then I'm going to get those 10,000. I'm going to go sit in the printer's place and sign one of 10,000, two of 10,000. So that's going to take me a week. And then you get the book, 100 copies of the book to give to your clients. Again, that's the part that, is relatively unique here. 100 copies of the book to give to your clients. You get the digital rights, the forever digital use rights for the 52 sketches and the 52 essays. These people the people who will buy this will use these in social media, and they'll use them in their client newsletter, and They'll use them in communication. We've had people in Texas print them on a billboard in Texas, of course.
Oh, I saw that. I thought it was like digital magic.
Yeah, no, that one, the one you saw probably was digital magic, but there is a real one. And I just haven't been able to get a picture of it. So you can print them on a t-shirt, you can print them on a mug, as long as you're not selling them to give to clients. So like we call it the do whatever you want license. So you get the do whatever you want license, 52 sketches forever. And I was like, well, geez, how do you price that? Right? Like what do you do? And so I knew enough from my art show, because when I did the art show, I literally read everything I could get my hands on how to price art. And I don't know if you know this, but there's no manual.
Yeah, I do know that.
Yeah, there's no, like, I looked everywhere. There's no, like, in my world, you can price a comparable asset of similar risk and similar reward, and you can come up with a price. In the art world, there's nothing. So the same thing with the book. I was like, well, wait a second. This isn't really a book. It's 52 weeks of marketing. It's all these other things. So I was like, well, I just picked a number. And partially I was like, okay, you know what? I want to do something that scares me. And I've always wanted to do $1 million book launch. Mm-hmm. And so we priced it at $10,000 a piece. 100 people can buy it. It's $1 million. We've actually made 20 slots available that would include me coming to speak at your book, like at a book party.
Nice.
So those are 20,000. So it's actually, what is that? It's 100 and if those all sell, it's a $1.2 million project.
Amazing.
And it's crazy, right? Like, and I feel all those feelings of like, wait, who told you could do this? I have a buddy, he's called Imposter Syndrome, and he shows up every time I do something cool. Yeah. He comes every time I talk about, like right now, I'm like, what? That's nuts. I can hear listeners being like, what? I'm scared to death. And that's part of the project.
Yeah, right. Imposter Syndrome's a good sign. Like if Imposter Syndrome shows up, it means you're doing something interesting and new.
For sure.
Okay, so that's incredible. Very cool. Totally. I saw it and I was just like, oh, we have to talk about this. Has someone besides Imposter Syndrome shown up to throw rocks at you?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, we've only recently started announcing. I mean, you saw one of the early announcements. You probably saw Blair and talk about it.
I think so.
And Blair is a friend of mine, and he's had something to do with this. I'll call him and be like, really, am I doing it? And he's like, do you know the answer to this? Like, so, yeah, I think I saw, I'm trying to spend less and less time on Twitter. I use Twitter for a lot for broadcasting, but I'm trying not to do a lot of interacting there. But I did see like people in my industry saying things like it's obviously a top, like that's a joke that we'll always say, like the market's certainly frothy at this point if Carl's doing this, and then somebody else, the one that, and those are like whatever, like it's not for you. You clearly don't understand. Somebody else said, oh, here's Carl playing a joke on all his loyal fans, and I then explained to him what it was. I was like, no joke here. Like this is what he's like. Oh, I didn't get that it had the digital rights, right? So those things, I'm like, it's not for you. The one that I hurt the most recently was somebody saying, I thought you were all about helping people. Mm-hmm. Why are you suddenly leaving everybody out? So that, and I can feel that and then say, and it's okay for me to do a project like this. So yeah, for sure. And I don't know if it'll work. I mean, we've already pre-sold a bunch of them. We opened up 21 early seats because there were people who sent notes saying literally like, I'm bringing a bag of cash to your door. And I was like, oh, okay. But I don't know if we'll get to, I don't even know if we'll get to 50, but I'm okay with that because next year we could sell 10 more and 10 more until all 100 go.
Right.
I don't know if it'll work is what I'm saying. I have no idea if it'll work, but there's enough tailwind for me to try.
Yeah. I love that. I actually wrote that down. Tailwind. That's your noticing engine is very good, where you'll notice this sort of puppy dog face stuff, but then also like when something happens, it's not just like you move on to the next thing. It's like, whoa, there's the sort of after effect of motion happening here. Like, just really, really good detector.
Jonathan, we tried to systemize that a bit. Like I think of it as a system. Like we use early detection stuff, like Twitter's a great place to toss something out. Mm-hmm. And again, if you get no feedback, I don't use that as a sign. It's only if I get feedback that I'm like, oh, interesting. Because no feedback, actually, The sample size is so small that no matter what the feedback is, it's inconclusive. So the only thing I can ever say from it is like, oh, interesting. Like maybe I should try a little more of that.
Right.
You know, right? Like, and just it's just a slight tailwind at that point. And then, but we try to like we have systems now for like, where does the idea get tested first? Well, behavior app radio is where it gets heard first. And then if it makes it out of behavior app radio, it'll go here. And if it makes it out of there, it'll go here. And eventually it'll end up in volume 4, right? Because that's part of it. That's the other thing I should tell you. The book's name, we were like, what should we name the book? I was like, well, let's just call it volume 1. So somebody on the team actually suggested volume 1. I'm like, what? Well, you can't do that. Like, my publisher would never, like, well, we don't have a publisher. The design of the book, Jonathan, how cool is this? Like, when we realized we didn't have to design for Amazon or the bookstore, all we had to design was for the moment. I just envisioning it. I'm doing it right now. Like a financial person, financial advice giver has it in their hand and they hand it to a customer, a client. That moment, we could design the entire book cover for that moment.
Yeah.
Right? Really cool. So
that's huge.
Yeah, some fun stuff.
Huge. That's amazing. Yep.
Yeah.
Just so focused on what it's for. This is what it's for.
Yep.
Awesome.
And that circles back to your idea of like throwing stones. I have tried to get really, really good, and I'm not very good at it, but I try so hard that it's not for them, right? Seth's phrase, like it's not for you. And so if there's anybody throwing stones, I understand and empathize and get it. And there's a reasonable, if they're thoughtful, I treat them as gold because I can make the project better. But largely I say it must not, either I didn't communicate well enough or it's not for you.
Right.
And both of those are within my power, which is really, really freeing to me. Because if I didn't communicate clearly, that's on me. And if it's not for you, there's nothing I can do. It's okay. We'll just move on.
Right. Yeah, not everyone gets the joke, as they say.
Yeah.
So, okay, so you just mentioned the behavior gap radio, right? And,
yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit because I am signed up to that. It's well, you can describe it. What's the?
Yeah, I think for your listeners, this may be the most important idea because obviously there's a whole bunch of caveats around that book project that make it unique. I had somebody tell me, a good friend of mine said, Carl, you're an N of 1 for this project. Like, I don't know anybody else who could do it because you've got a market that needs it. So I understand that, right? But there's a bunch of N of 1 projects. For everybody listening has an N of 1 project, right? Like you're the only one that could do it. So don't let that be a place to hide. But behavior app radio to me is, so let me just describe how it happened. I was noticing things in the world, and it was actually a challenge from Seth Godin. We were having breakfast and he said, Carl, why aren't you writing a daily blog? And I said, because it's, he's unabashed about how powerful that's been for him. I'm like, well, I don't like to write. He's like, well, you like to talk. And so why don't you just record? And I'm like, oh my gosh, really? And this was before like the most recent like podcast craze. So I just started recording. Initially, the notes folder I described earlier on wasn't notes. It was audio files, just what do you call it? Voice memos. So I started recording voice memos and I was saving them on a Dropbox file folder. And somebody on the team, and when I say team, there's 3 of us. Somebody on the team found them and they're like, do you mind if why don't we start a podcast? And I was like, no, I don't want to, no, I can't. All sorts of imposter syndrome. They're like, well, okay, what if I just put them on SoundCloud and we embed the player someplace? And I was like, okay, fine. And then the Times ran across them and they were like, can we run them every once in a while? So they ran them every once in a while, but then they stopped. And so it was just us posting these things up, and I'd get emails from people saying, I love your podcast. And I'd be like, I don't have a podcast. And they would say, I don't know what you call it, but could you put it on iTunes so I could listen to it in the car? I'm like, all right. So we started it. And, but remember, it was just part of my process. That's why I think everybody could do this. It's Austin Kleon's work, like show your work. So I just started recording these every day. And sometimes I do like 6 a day. And sometimes I take days off, but I still have the 6. Like I haven't missed a day for a very long time, except Sundays. I take Sundays off in terms of publishing. So, and then the people I was having a conversation with the folks at Supercast. And Supercast is a paid subscriber-based podcast system, which is amazing. You can go check it out. And they were like, wait, you're doing this anyway. And so I decided like I didn't care if anybody listened to it. And Seth says that. This is the story I tell myself, at least. I'm not sure it's true, but I try to tell myself I don't care if anybody would listen to it.
Hmm.
I'm doing it anyway. It's the idea generation. Seth says it's the metacognition, right? Like it's thinking about your thinking. And it's the exercise of that muscle. Because like you said, you have hundreds of them sitting in there. Like I do too. Like people are like, when are you gonna run out of ideas? Never, as long as I keep exercising the muscle.
Right.
So I'm doing it anyway. So yeah, somebody was like, well, what if you just made it a paid podcast? So I was like, I want to do a little experiment. What if I told no one about it for a while? I just put it up, and all we did, so we didn't lean on my list. We didn't lean on anybody else. Like all we did was we post about it on Twitter and Instagram. Mm-hmm. And we take little snippets, audiograms, post them on Twitter and Instagram. What if we did that? And I thought, if I did that for a year and I made it $10 a month, would I be happy or sad at the end of the year? Mm-hmm. And I was like, dude, there's no doubt. Like if I had no audience and I started doing that every day and I put it on Instagram and Twitter, that's all I did. Every day I took a snippet or I took the highlight. I wrote the highlight on Instagram and Twitter and said, if you like this, you'd love my daily podcast. It's $10. Go here, sign up. If you did that every day for a year, I would be willing to bet money that you would be happy you did it.
It's such a good way to put it.
Like it's right. I don't know how happy, I don't know why, but I guarantee you'd be happy.
Well, here's the flip side of that, because I agree with you, but let's just let the devil come in and advocate. So that's a lot of time to invest in something, and I want to pay off, Carl. I want it to pay off. I want my time. I could use that. I could bill $200 for that hour or two every day. So I'm losing, whatever, 365 minus Sundays times at least 100.
Yeah, I don't buy it. So here's what I don't buy. I mean, I see the point totally, and I think it's
it's opportunity cost at least.
Yeah, I think it's a very good conversation. So number one, it doesn't take me an hour. It takes me about 15 minutes. So we got that. So I should describe. It's a daily podcast. And I was like, I don't want to start a podcast. I don't want to have guests. That's so much work. So I have another concept that I love called turn the flaw into the feature. So it started with the Sharpie, right? Like I downloaded it. Believe me, I downloaded Illustrator and tried to figure out how to use it and couldn't figure out how to use it. So I was like, I'll just have to use a Sharpie and cardstock and a Fujitsu snap scanner. I did that. And a couple of years later, I hired a designer and I said, hey, take this and turn it into a beautifully designed product. I put it out and everybody was like, wait, I love the Sharpie. So the flaw became the feature. So in this case, Behavior App Radio, I was like, oh no, podcasts have guests and they're long and they're thoughtful. I didn't have time for any of that. And I didn't want to do it. And I wasn't very good. So it's like, okay, well, but I want to do one. So, okay, well, what's the flaw is it's just me talking. So it's me talking between 3 and 12 minutes. And I have no problem with it being 3 minutes. In fact, I work really hard to make it 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. So it's me talking between 3 and 12 minutes. And now I've asked, like, anybody want me to have guests? And people are like, no. In fact, I just had somebody yesterday send me a message saying, your podcast fits perfectly into my time while I'm making my coffee. Mm-hmm. And I love it because I don't have to set aside a bunch of time. So the flaw has become a feature. Right. So reason number one, it doesn't take that much time. So if I was saying that to myself, I really want to do this, but it takes too much time, I would say, how could I do it in a way that didn't take much time? Yeah. Number two, I don't know what the value would be. So remember the value extraction. I'm always thinking value creation and value extraction. Yep. Well, value extraction doesn't have to be money. Value extraction could be thinking about my thinking. Seth claims he'd write his daily blog if nobody read it.
I'm terrified of stopping my daily blog. I would never stop it.
Why?
Because my brain would dry up. Like it's where all my ideas. So here, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and ideas, I don't make my ideas. Ideas pop into my head, and I've created the conditions that cause a certain kind of idea to pop into my head. So it's kind of like these events are happening to me, but if I took away the conditions, the events would stop happening to me. Even though they're happening in my head, they're like outside events. It's like if I moved to, I don't know, Afghanistan, or if I, live in Providence, Rhode Island, different events are going to happen to me and it's going to cause different actions. I'm going to have to make different decisions because outside events are predictably different in those two places. And if
Mm-hmm.
I stopped doing my daily list, that'd be like moving my brain to a place where it would stop having these things happen to it. It's hard. I haven't figured out how to describe this very well, but
Well,
taking, yeah, go ahead. Maybe
are those things creating value in other areas of your life?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, so that to me is the most interesting part, right? Like, wait, I don't want to do this thing because it's going to take an hour, and I could have billed $100 an hour,
Mm-hmm.
or 200 or 500, whatever the number is.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be like saying, the New York Times didn't pay me very well,
Sure.
if at all. How could I possibly calculate what it was worth to me?
Yes. Well, so there's the leap of faith, and I've made that leap, and there's a solid ground on the other side of the chasm.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the thing for the listener who doubts this, you have to
Try it.
yes, there is. I can give maybe even more specific question. It's really a question: is why are you doing it in the first place? So if you want to do it to make $1 million, then don't do it.
Yeah.
But if you want to do it because you want to do it, it seems like a fun way to spend your day instead of doing actual work, or not even your whole day. It's spend 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Then go ahead. It's like the when I'm coaching someone and they're like, "But how's this going to pay off?" And I'm like, "I don't know, but I'm sure." It's like you said at the beginning. I'm sure if you don't do it, you're going to be stuck right where you are right now in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years.
Yeah, that inability to draw a linear line between creation and capture is I think a real hang up for most of us. And I have gotten so comfortable with the idea because we go deep down this hole, but if we live in a complex adaptive system, and in complex adaptive systems, you can't draw linear straight lines between creation and capture. I mean, you have to be comfortable with the idea that it's going to be a messy. Everybody will tell you that. And that's why you see so many of those little hand-drawn things that look like balls of yarn. They're like, you have like a hockey stick, and that's like the myth. Hockey stick up and to the right is the myth, and then you have the ball of yarn is the reality. Like, I had no clue that this was going to happen. My entire career is a giant ball of yarn. I have no clue what's going to happen next. And I've now gotten to the point where if I'm not in that condition, I just think of it as irreducible uncertainty, right? If I'm not living in uncertainty with extended breaks, right? Like time to rest and recover, because uncertainty can be a little taxing. But if I'm not living in uncertainty, then I'm doing something wrong. So, I love Seth's, like, it may not work. So I agree. Just like go and see everybody. I think everybody who's honest about a creative career says this same thing.
The argument, you mean?
Yeah. Everybody who has a creative career that's worked.
Oh, yeah.
And if they're honest, and I just mean that by like self-aware of it, like it's not necessarily dishonest. I'm just saying,
sure.
They'll say, I didn't know. Like I had a plan, but mostly it's this thing that you could not do.
Right.
And we've all felt it, and most of us bury it. But if you're feeling it, like all I'm suggesting is like I call it dancing with dragons, like dance with it a little bit.
Yeah, let it out. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And find a forum. And now I don't care if it's just to your neighborhood coffee shop or if it's on Twitter, like whatever, find a forum, let it out, play in public. Because I promise you, if you do it consistently for a year, you won't be sad you did it. I don't know why you'll be happy, but I know you won't be sad.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I've got a lot of engineering mindset folks who feel like they can predict the future in many ways. And when there's decreased amount of certainty, about like building stuff, software and so forth. So it's like, well, I know if I do this, then it's going to do that. So it's tough to say to them, it's like, okay, but you gotta trust, you gotta let go and not know exactly how it's going to play out. But you're right. If you show up for a year and you're doing something that's meaningful to you in some way that you want to do, not just because you think there's a big payout at the end, because you want to do it, you're not going to be sad that you did it. You're not.
For sure.
It's so good. Okay, so is there more to talk about with the podcast, the daily podcast? Or could we jump over, if so, then let's definitely do that. Also curious about the mailing list. And I guess we already did talk about selling the sketches. I have a number of illustrators on the list, and it's, and they're struggling. It's like, how could I possibly How can I put Cheerios in the bowl doing illustration without going on Upwork and just being told what to do by horrible clients?
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know, but let me wrap up behavior Brady. I would just say the reason I like that as a topic for this audience is because everybody could do it. Like if you just took your process and decided to do your work publicly, how did you pick that pen? Which app do you use? Like, I know that's a little tactical, but it's like I tried, like just so many of us are convinced we don't have anything to say. And I just would beg you to believe me, like that's classic imposter syndrome thinking, is that because it's become easy or second nature for you, both of those in air quotes, it's become easy or second nature for you, you think it's easier or second nature for everyone else. And if it's easy and second nature for everyone else, it must not be valuable because it's common. Well, it turns out it's not. None of those things are true. Yep. You've just forgotten. Like I always, in my audience, I always tell them, like, you've forgotten that most people in the world don't know what standard deviation means. Again, you throw it around like it's like a normal term. So that's like behavior, the podcast, everybody could just start doing that. And you look, it doesn't have to be a paid podcast, just anyway. So that was how I'd wrap that up. The illustration thing, I don't know. I mean, I have a unique tailwind because it's purpose art, but there's a lot of it going on. I see, really good friend of mine that does marketing cartoons, the marketoonist, Tom Fishborn, marketoonist, like he does marketing cartoons, illustrations around. So I think that well, maybe I should just look, somebody came up, asked me if they could have one on the wall. I said sure, and they paid me for it. And then we sell digital downloads for $100 a piece. You get the high res file and the forever do whatever you want license is what we call it. And now who's going to pay $100? Like the people who pay the $100 for these are people who typically it's not. I mean, I have a few sketches that people hang on their walls in their house, like one maybe. The only one my wife would allow in our house. But the rest are like in the office, right? They serve a purpose.
Right.
So I don't know outside of that, except that I've watched some people do, and it's always the same. The formula is always the same. It's like play in traffic, do a lot of it. And then find interesting ways. Like there's so many interesting illustrators right now on Instagram getting paid for all the standard ways, like a notebook, a print, a t-shirt, and then digital rights to it. I've followed, I have a collection of those people because I just love, because they're permissionless, right? Like there's no gallery owner. Right. There's no, like they're direct to the people in Kevin Kelly's sort of standard 1,000 true fans approach. Right. So that's all I've really got on that. I don't really know how to be helpful there.
I think that was pretty helpful. And again, it's kind of like a bunch of things that we've said, I think all would contribute into observations that might work for the illustrators in the audience. There's not a million tactics. Yeah. There's just not, you don't have to worry as much about all of that stuff that you might be worrying about. And I do love the working in public or playing in traffic and paying attention to what's meaningful to people. But there is also the thing of like I started doing a Sunday comic and I love it. Like it's super fun. Like, is anything going to happen from it? No, I don't think so. It's just another way to communicate the ideas that I write about every day. And it breaks up the, because I do even Sundays. So, 7 days a week, I'm putting stuff out. So it breaks it up for me. And it's a different way to communicate hard ideas in a funny way. So I don't know, maybe something will happen. But it's just fun.
As I'm listening to you, Jonathan, I'm thinking like I've actually had this conversation probably 100 times with people. So I do, like, here's what I would do is I would find one person that would buy something. Like going from 0 to 1 is, I don't know, 60, 70, 80% of the work.
Yeah.
And because it's all the fear is there, all the tactical places to hide. Like, what is it? So like, I don't care what it is. Like I just worked with somebody here locally that loves to draw kind of like zombie sort of drawings, which I'm just not into it. I have no interest in, but I love this person because they're way into it. Like I'm thing agnostic. I just am super stoked when you have a thing. And his thing is he draws these zombie things. I'm like, you know where these would be super cool is a skateboard deck. Like would you do me a favor? Just go buy one blank skateboard deck, draw one and put it up for sale for $50. And just see like, hey, I made this thing. I hope you like it. Classic stuff. Like and do that in public. And if you don't have anybody in public listening to you, send an email to 10 people. Saying I made this thing. Okay, how about stickers? I made a pack of 5 stickers. People seem to find my sketches a little humorous and lighthearted, and it makes them feel good. So I made a packet of 5 stickers. They're $12. Like we could okay, make a mug, do a t-shirt, do it. Like we could riff all day on what the thing is, but what matters is the 0 to 1. Can you get somebody to buy? Can you get one person to buy?
Yeah, I'm chuckling because of the terror of doing that first skateboard. It's just so classic.
For sure. And he hasn't done it yet. And I'm literally like, I actually went out and bought this kid. He's 24. He's an amazing, like one of the best artists I've ever seen, but no one knows it. And I actually went out and bought his domain. His name as a domain was available. So I bought it and I told him, you either start putting stuff up on this or 60 days from now, I'm going to start putting stuff up drawn with my left hand in your name. And he's like, oh, and only because I'm trying to force the issue because I care about him. So, but yeah, it's super scary. And I think that's why we all go try to find a million places to hide. No, sell one thing.
Yeah.
Sell one thing. There's nothing left to hide.
Yep. Totally. And there's so many people in my audience who just sell their time. They've never really sold anything. They're just renting themselves out, or they kind of have a job without a boss or benefits. And they've never priced anything. They've never put a price for something on a thing and said, this is $50, period.
Oh, it's so scary.
Yeah, right.
Can I riff on that for just a second?
Yeah.
I think there's a reason that's so scary. And please, I'm like trying to be massive empathetic hug here. I'll actually probably get emotional about it because excuse me, when you create something like that, you are literally putting yourself up for judgment, right? I think it's the most intimate. I mean, I have spent my life studying risk and risk taking. I backcountry ski and I'm involved with lots of venture capitalists and private. Like I know a lot about risk. I cannot think of a more intimate form of risk than what we're talking about here, is because you're literally saying, and I always think of this when I hear Seth say this, I hear I made this, I hope you like it. I think of like holding something in my hands and extending my arms to somebody else and saying, here, Jonathan, I made this. And then the words, I hope you like it. And because there are going to be plenty of people who don't, and they are going to have no problem in an anonymous way being vocal about it, and you're going to hear it. And you're like, so I don't think there's any more intimate form of risk. So that is art. That's what you're scared of.
Yep.
And on the other side of that fear is like the most intense, wonderful satisfaction of putting something into the world. And so balancing that, I just think is so beautiful. Like it's that riff just now, like that's at the heart of the work I want to do more of, is like, how do we get more people to say, I made this, like, I hope you like it, to the world, because we need that. I as a quote unquote consumer need that book. I need that print. I need that t-shirt because it shows to me there's still people making things they care about. And that's the only world I want to live in.
Yeah. Right. Wow. I don't think we can top that.
Yeah. Super fun.
Carl, thanks so much for coming on, sharing your observations and experience and expertise. Where should folks go to find out more about what you're up to?
Probably the easiest is behaviorgap.com. And then, if you're interested in seeing the sort of broadcast stuff on Twitter, it's at behaviorgap, and Instagram at behaviorgap.
Amazing. Wow. Thanks again.
Jonathan, my pleasure. That was really, really fun.
All right, folks, that's it for this week. I'm Jonathan Stark, and I hope you join me again next time for Ditching Hourly. Bye.